The HOA tried to steal my farm. Now their president is facing prison time. They faked paperwork, bulldozed my land, and thought I wouldn't fight back. But I took them to court, exposed their fraud, and now they're bankrupt. The HOA is under legal supervision, and their leader is about to be sentenced. No one will ever take my home again. Andrew Wilson had spent the last 15 years cultivating the life he had always dreamed of. His 5-acre farm was his sanctuary, a quiet escape from the noise and chaos of the world. Nestled on the outskirts of a growing suburban neighborhood, his land remained untouched by the rapid development creeping closer with each passing year. While new houses and shopping centers sprang up in every direction, his farm stood as a reminder of simpler times, a place where he could wake up to the sound of birds instead of honking cars and construction drills. He had built everything with his own 2 hands: the sturdy red barn, the rows of crops planted with precision, the small but cozy house that overlooked the fields. Every tree, every fence post, every patch of soil held a piece of him. This wasn't just property, it was his life's work. That morning started just like any other. The golden rays of the early sun stretched over the horizon, casting long shadows across the land. Andrew sat on his front porch, a steaming mug of coffee in his hands, enjoying the quiet symphony of rustling leaves and chirping birds. The faint hum of cars on the distant highway was just a dull backdrop to the tranquility. He took a deep breath, savoring the crisp air, and allowed himself a small smile. This was home. This was peace. But peace never lasts forever. The first sign that something was wrong came as a low, distant rumble. At first, Andrew didn't think much of it, probably just construction work in the nearby subdivision. They were always building something. But then the rumble grew louder, closer, and then, unmistakably, it was on his land. Andrew set his coffee mug down, his brows furrowing. Something wasn't right. He pushed himself up from his chair and started walking toward the noise, his boots crunching against the gravel path. As he rounded the corner of his house, his heart nearly stopped. A massive bulldozer was tearing through his field, flattening his crops as if they were nothing but weeds. The steel blade dug into the earth, uprooting months of careful planting, reducing rows of vegetables to shredded stalks and dirt. Andrew's stomach twisted in disbelief, his pulse spiking with adrenaline. And then he saw the barn. The towering machine shifted direction, its monstrous blade aimed straight at the barn he had built with his own hands. The driver didn't even hesitate. The bulldozer lurched forward, its engine roaring as the metal blade crashed into the wooden structure. The sound of splintering beams and crumbling walls was deafening. Andrew felt something inside him snap. "Hey, stop," he bellowed, breaking into a sprint. His voice was hoarse with panic, his feet pounding against the earth. "What the hell are you doing? That's my property." The workers, a handful of men in hard hats and reflective vests, paused, turning toward him. Some looked surprised, others just indifferent, as if this was just another day on the job. One man, middle-aged with a clipboard tucked under his arm, stepped forward, lifting a hand to signal the bulldozer driver. The massive machine came to a reluctant halt, its engine still rumbling, ready to finish what it had started. "Can I help you?" the man asked, his tone completely void of concern. Andrew's hands trembled with rage as he tried to catch his breath. "Help me? Are you kidding? What the hell do you think you're doing? This is MY land. You can't just come in here and destroy my property." The man barely blinked. He flipped through the papers on his clipboard and shrugged. "We're following orders, sir. The homeowner association approved the removal of the structure and the clearing of the lot. It's in violation of HOA bylaws." Andrew's mind reeled. HOA? Homeowner association. His farm wasn't part of the HOA. He had never agreed to be part of their subdivision. His property was private land, separate from the neighborhood. His voice shook with disbelief. "I'm not in the HOA. My land has nothing to do with your neighborhood." The man shrugged again, completely unfazed. "According to the paperwork, this property now falls under HOA jurisdiction. The annexation was approved last year. Didn't you get the notice?" A cold chill ran down Andrew's spine. Annexation notice? His hands clenched into tight fists. He hadn't received a single letter, a phone call, nothing. And now, in a matter of minutes, his farm was being torn apart under some bogus claim of HOA authority. His voice was laced with rage and desperation. "This is a mistake. You have no right to do this. You need to stop. Now." The contractor sighed, clearly impatient. "Look, I'm just here to do a job. If you have a problem, take it up with the HOA board. My crew isn't stopping until the job is done." Andrew's vision blurred with fury. He had spent 15 years building this life, and now some power-hungry HOA board thought they could just erase it with a bulldozer? No, Hell no. If you don't stop this right now, I'm calling the sheriff. His voice was deadly serious now, his fists clenched so tight his nails dug into his palms. The contractor smirked, barely masking his amusement. Suit yourself. But it won't change anything. We have the board's approval. Andrew didn't waste another second. He yanked his phone from his pocket, his hands shaking as he punched in the number for the sheriff's office. As the dispatcher answered, Andrew's voice was urgent, barely controlled rage boiling beneath the surface. I need an officer out here. Now. My property is being destroyed. He barely heard the dispatcher's response. His eyes were locked on the bulldozer, still poised like a predator ready to finish the kill. The sheriff was on his way. But Andrew knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning. Andrew stood his ground, fists clenched at his sides as the bulldozer rumbled like a beast waiting to charge again. His barn was already in ruins, and his crops, months of labor, lay flattened beneath heavy treads. The contractor, still flipping through his clipboard, looked completely uninterested in Andrew's rage. The seconds dragged as Andrew waited for the sheriff, his heart pounding in his chest. Every time the bulldozer let out a hiss of air, his blood boiled hotter. He didn't care what papers these guys had. This was his land, and they had no right to touch it. Then, in the distance, he heard it, the unmistakable whoop of a police siren. A dusty patrol car rolled onto the property, tires crunching over the torn-up soil. Relief flooded through Andrew, but it was quickly replaced by a renewed sense of determination. This wasn't just about stopping the destruction. He needed answers. The sheriff, a tall, no-nonsense man in dark aviator sunglasses, stepped out of his vehicle. He adjusted his belt, scanning the scene with a look of mild irritation, as if he had already had enough of whatever mess was unfolding. "All right, what's going on here?" he asked, his voice steady but authoritative. Andrew wasted no time. "They're trespassing, Sheriff. They showed up this morning and started tearing my farm apart. They're claiming the HOA has the right to do this. But this is MY property. I never agreed to be part of their damn HOA." The contractor sighed loudly, rubbing his temple as if this was an inconvenience. "Look, officer, we're just following orders. The homeowner association board approved the annexation of this land. We have all the proper paperwork." The sheriff's brows knitted together. "Annexation? HOA." He turned back to Andrew. "You saying you didn't agree to this?" "Not a chance in hell." Andrew's voice was steel. "I never signed anything, never got any notice, never had any discussion with anyone about this. My farm isn't part of their neighborhood." The sheriff exhaled through his nose, clearly annoyed. "All right, let me see this paperwork." The contractor handed over the clipboard, shifting on his feet as the sheriff flipped through the pages. Andrew watched carefully, studying the officer's face as he scanned the documents. At first, the sheriff's expression was unreadable, but then his jaw tightened. Andrew caught it immediately. Something wasn't right. The sheriff flipped back a few pages, rereading something, then slowly lowered the clipboard. "You got proof that this guy was notified?" he asked, his voice sharp. The contractor paused, just for a second, but it was enough. "The notices were sent out last year," he answered, but there was no confidence in his voice. The sheriff narrowed his eyes. "Sent how? Registered mail? Hand-delivered? Email?" The contractor cleared his throat, suddenly looking very interested in the dirt beneath his boots. The HOA handles those details. We just got the approval order to clear the land." Andrew's anger surged. "That's because they never sent anything. I would have fought this the second I heard about it." He turned to the sheriff, his voice firm. "They're trying to steal my land. This is a scam." The sheriff nodded slowly, handing the clipboard back to the contractor. "I'm gonna need to put a hold on this work until we get some things cleared up. You can't just destroy a man's property without verifiable proof that he was notified and agreed to the terms." The contractor stiffened. "We have the board's approval, and I have the authority to stop this until I figure out if that approval was even legal." The sheriff's tone left no room for argument. The contractor's jaw tightened, but he waved to the bulldozer driver. "Shut it down for now." The bulldozer groaned as its engine powered down, leaving behind an eerie silence. The workers exchanged glances, uncertain of what would happen next. Andrew took a deep breath, his chest still tight. His barn was gone, his fields ruined, but at least, for now, the destruction had stopped. The sheriff turned to him. "I'll need to take a closer look at this annexation claim. You got your property records handy?" Andrew nodded immediately. Inside. I've got everything. The sheriff gave him a short nod. Good. Let's sort this out. But Andrew already knew. This wasn't over. Not even close. Andrew didn't waste any time. As soon as the sheriff left, he stormed into his house, rifling through drawers and cabinets until he found the thick folder containing every legal document tied to his farm. Deed, property tax records, original purchase agreement, everything that proved this land was his and his alone. He couldn't shake the sheriff's reaction when he looked at the HOA's paperwork. Something was off, and Andrew was going to tear this apart piece by piece until he found the truth. By the time he got someone on the phone at the county clerk's office, his frustration was boiling over. I need information on a supposed annexation, he said, doing his best to keep his voice steady. The homeowner association near my property is claiming they annexed my land. Can you check if there's anything filed? The clerk on the other end sounded confused, asking for his property details before putting him on hold. Andrew gritted his teeth, pacing his living room while he waited. He had never agreed to be part of the HOA. He had never been notified. There was no way this was legal. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours before the clerk came back on the line. Sir, I'm not seeing any record of an annexation involving your property, she said. If something like that had been filed, it would be in our system, and you would have been officially notified. Andrew's fingers tightened around his phone. Are you sure? He asked, just to be certain. There's nothing at all. Nothing, the clerk confirmed. If the HOA is claiming they have control over your property, they're doing it without county approval. Andrew felt his blood pressure spike. So the HOA had done this behind closed doors, without going through the legal process. His mind flashed back to the contractor's smug indifference, to the bulldozer driver who didn't even hesitate before leveling his barn. This wasn't some misunderstanding. They knew exactly what they were doing. If the HOA was behind this, there was only one person to confront. Karen Wills. Andrew had never met her in person, but he had heard the name enough times. The HOA president, the woman who ran the board like her own private kingdom. He didn't bother calling. He wanted to look her in the eye when he called her out on her lies. Within the hour, he was parking his truck in front of the HOA office, a bland brick building sitting at the edge of the neighborhood. His boots hit the pavement hard as he marched through the doors, straight to the receptionist. I need to speak with Karen Wills. Now, he said, his voice sharp. The bored-looking woman behind the desk barely glanced up from her computer. Do you have an appointment? Andrew leaned forward, his patience gone. No, but I think she'll want to hear what I have to say. The receptionist sighed, picking up the phone and mumbling something before nodding toward the waiting area. She'll be out in a minute. Andrew folded his arms, his jaw tight as he waited. He didn't have to wait long. Karen Wills appeared, walking toward him with the kind of practiced smile that made his skin crawl. She was in her mid-50s, dressed in a crisp blazer, with the air of someone who was used to being in charge. Mr. Wilson, she said, her voice smooth but devoid of any real warmth. What can I do for you? Andrew cut straight to the point. You can explain why your HOA sent a damn bulldozer onto my land and destroyed my barn when you have no legal right to my property. Karen's smile didn't falter, but there was something cold in her eyes. As I'm sure you're aware, your property was annexed into our HOA jurisdiction last year. The board approved it unanimously. There was a public meeting. Notices were sent to all affected property owners. Andrew let out a bitter laugh. That's a lie. I never received any notice, and the county has no record of your so-called annexation. You had no right to touch my property. Karen's expression hardened, the fake politeness vanishing. Mr. Wilson, the annexation was perfectly legal. If you failed to keep up with your obligations as a property owner, that's not the HOA's fault. Your barn was in violation of HOA bylaws, and the board took the necessary steps to resolve the issue. Andrew felt his pulse hammering in his ears. Necessary steps? You destroyed my property, my livelihood. That barn was mine. It had nothing to do with your HOA. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. If you have concerns, I suggest you take it up with our legal team. But as far as the HOA is concerned, the matter is settled. Andrew stared at her, his fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to yell, to demand justice, but he could already see it. Karen Wills wasn't going to budge. Not willingly. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. I will take it up with your legal team, he said, his voice low and steady. And with the sheriff, the county, and anyone else who will listen. This isn't over. Karen didn't respond. She just gave him a tight-lipped smile before turning on her heel and disappearing back into her office. Andrew walked out of the building, his mind racing. The HOA had crossed a line, and they thought they could get away with it. But they had made a mistake. They had come after the wrong man. This was just beginning. Andrew knew he couldn't fight this battle alone. The HOA had money, legal resources, and a web of bureaucracy they could hide behind. He needed someone who could go toe-to-toe with him in a courtroom. That's why, the morning after his confrontation with Karen Wills, he found himself sitting in the office of Lisa Grant, a local attorney with a reputation for taking on tough cases and winning. Lisa was in her early 40s, sharp-eyed, and all business. Her office was cluttered with legal books and case files, and from the moment Andrew stepped inside, he could tell this woman didn't play around. She listened intently as he laid everything out: the bulldozer, the bogus annexation claim, the county clerk confirming no legal record existed, and the HOA's arrogance when confronted. She didn't interrupt, didn't take notes, just watched him, her mind clearly processing every detail. When he finished, Lisa leaned forward, folding her hands on the desk. "This," she said, "is what we call a classic case of HOA overreach. And from what you've told me, it sounds like they're not just stretching their authority, they're operating outside the law entirely." Andrew's jaw tightened. "Then what's our next move?" Lisa nodded, already formulating a plan. "First, we need to file an injunction to stop them from doing anything else to your property. That'll buy us time while I request their meeting minutes, annexation documents, and any legal filings they claim to have made. If they can't produce those records, or if there are irregularities, we'll have enough to start tearing their case apart." Andrew felt a rush of determination. This was exactly what he needed, someone who could go on the offensive. Lisa tapped a pen against the desk. "You said the county has no record of this annexation?" "Nothing," Andrew confirmed. "And I never received a notice." Lisa smirked, but it wasn't amusement. It was the look of someone who had just found an opening in the armor. If the HOA never followed the legal process, this whole thing falls apart. Let's start with that. She stood, reaching for a folder. "Give me a day or two to dig into this. In the meantime, keep an eye out for anyone else who might have been affected by the HOA's overreach." Andrew nodded. He didn't have to look far. Later that afternoon, Andrew drove into town to run some errands when he bumped into Bill Harrison, an older retiree who had lived near the neighborhood for decades. He was a no-nonsense kind of guy, with sun-weathered skin and a habit of speaking his mind. Andrew had barely mentioned his fight with the HO when Bill let out a dark chuckle. "Son, you're not the first one they've tried to push around," Bill said, shaking his head. "They sent me threatening letters about violations on my land, even though I ain't never been part of their damn HOA." Andrew's stomach tightened. "What kind of violations?" Bill scoffed. "Bunch of bullshit. Said my fence wasn't up to HOA standards. Then they started hinting that I should sell, like they were trying to squeeze me out. Figured they were just harassing me, so I ignored him. But now I'm hearing what they did to you? Sounds like they're getting bolder." Andrew's fists clenched. The HO wasn't just overstepping their boundaries, they were running a coordinated effort to take land. "Did you keep the letters?" Andrew asked. Bill nodded. "Damn right I did. Didn't trust those snakes. Got every letter, envelope, and email they ever sent me." Andrew felt a spark of hope. "I need to see them. This could be what we need to prove they've been targeting people outside their jurisdiction." Bill clapped him on the shoulder. "If it means taking those bastards down, hell, I'll hand over every damn piece of paper I got." That evening, Andrew and Bill spread out stacks of documents across Andrew's kitchen table, combing through every letter, fine, and notice the HOA had sent over the years. Lisa arrived a short while later, her eyes lighting up as soon as she saw the paperwork. "This," she said, flipping through a few pages, "is exactly what we needed." The pattern was obvious. The HOA had been systematically targeting landowners near their neighborhood, claiming violations that didn't exist, pressuring them to sell or comply with HOA rules they had never agreed to. Lisa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "We've got them." Andrew exhaled, a mix of relief and anger churning inside him. The fight was far from over, but now? Now he had proof. Andrew didn't sleep much that night. He sat at his kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers spread out before him. Every single letter, every notice Bill had kept told the same story. The HOA had been trying to force people out, manipulating legal loopholes to seize land. And now, they had gone too far. Lisa wasted no time. The next morning, she sent out formal legal requests to the HOA, demanding copies of their meeting minutes, annexation documents, and any records related to Andrew's property. At the same time, Andrew decided it was time to take the fight public. He contacted a local news station, sending them photos of his destroyed barn, the bulldozer in the middle of his land, and the paperwork proving that the HOA had never legally annexed his property. It didn't take long before the story spread. First, it was just the local station running a segment on a retired teacher's farm being demolished by an overreaching HOA. Then, larger outlets picked it up, and soon social media was flooded with comments calling out the HOA's corruption. People were outraged. Strangers reached out to Andrew, offering their support, their legal expertise, even donations to help him rebuild. Others came forward with their own horror stories about HOA abuse, some from other neighborhoods, some from entirely different states. The HOA had always operated in the shadows, using bureaucracy to silence people. But now, the world was watching. The pressure worked. Just a few days later, the HOA reluctantly handed over a batch of documents to Lisa, hoping to prove their legitimacy. But instead of helping their case, the records exposed everything. Buried deep within the meeting minutes was a discussion from months earlier, before the so-called annexation, where Karen Wills had pitched the idea of converting Andrew's land into a community park. The board had discussed how his farm would make the perfect green space for the neighborhood, boosting property values and creating a picturesque common area for the residents. But they knew there was a problem. Andrew wasn't part of the HOA, and he had no intention of selling. So they came up with a plan. The notes clearly outlined their strategy to claim annexation rights, use violations as leverage, and if necessary, force demolition under the pretense of community beautification. Lisa read the minutes out loud in Andrew's kitchen, her voice cold and measured. When she finished, she looked up at him. "They planned this from the start," she said. "This was never about HOA rules. This was a land grab." Andrew clenched his fists, his jaw tight with rage. He had suspected it all along, but now he had the proof. This wasn't incompetence or miscommunication. This was calculated theft. But the final blow came from an unexpected source. That evening, Andrew received a call from an unknown number. When he answered, a voice on the other end hesitated before speaking. "Mr. Wilson," the man said, his voice low, "I think I have something you need to see." The caller was a former HOA board member who had resigned months earlier. He didn't want to give his name over the phone, but he agreed to meet in person. The next day, Andrew and Lisa drove out to a small diner on the edge of town, where a nervous-looking man in his late 40s was already waiting at a booth. He introduced himself as Mark, a former treasurer for the HOA. He had quit after realizing just how deep the corruption ran. Mark slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything you need is on here," he said. "Emails, internal memos, even financial records." Karen and the board knew they had no legal claim to your land, but they moved forward anyway, hoping you wouldn't fight back. Andrew took the flash drive, gripping it tightly. "Why are you coming forward now?" Mark exhaled heavily. "Because it's gone too far. I thought they were just bending the rules, but when I saw what they did to your farm, I knew I had to say something. I should have done it sooner." Lisa plugged the drive into her laptop right there in the diner. The emails were damning. Karen had personally instructed board members to move quickly before Wilson catches on. Another email from a contractor warned the board that demolishing a private structure without legal backing could open them up to lawsuits, to which Karen had responded, "It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission." The financial records showed something even worse: payments made to board members, suspiciously high consulting fees to third-party companies that appeared to be owned by Karen's relatives, and thousands of dollars in HOA funds redirected for personal use. This wasn't just an overreach. It was fraud. Lisa closed the laptop and looked at Andrew. "This is bigger than your farm," she said. "This is criminal." Andrew felt the weight of it all settle on his shoulders. He had started this fight just trying to save his land, but now he realized he was about to bring down an entire corrupt system. He looked at Lisa, then at Mark. "Let's finish this," he said. This war wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to every homeowner the HOA had ever bullied. And he wasn't going to stop until justice was served. Andrew barely had time to process the weight of what they had uncovered before Lisa moved into action. The very next morning, she filed an official lawsuit against the HOA on Andrew's behalf, demanding damages for trespassing, destruction of property, and fraudulent annexation. But she didn't stop there. With the financial records Mark had provided, she also filed a request for a full forensic audit of the HOA's accounts, citing potential fraud and misappropriation of funds. This wasn't just a property dispute anymore. This was about exposing a corrupt system from the inside out. News of the lawsuit spread like wildfire. The media, which had already been covering Andrew's story, now had even more fuel. Headlines popped up across local and state news. Farmer fights back against HOA corruption. Retired teacher sues HOA after illegal land grab. HOA scandal unfolds. Fraud allegations emerge. The public was furious. What had started as a fight over one man's farm had become a symbol of HOA overreach across the country. Social media exploded with people sharing their own stories of unfair fines, forced property sales, and corrupt HOA boards. Then came the protests. At first, it was just a handful of local residents showing up outside the HOA office, holding signs that read, "HOAs aren't above the law," and "Justice for Andrew Wilson." But within days, the crowds grew. People from neighboring communities, activists, even former homeowners who had been victims of similar HOA abuses joined in. What started as a local outcry turned into a movement. Under mounting pressure, the HOA board was forced into damage control mode. They released a public statement, claiming they had acted in good faith, that the annexation was a misunderstanding, and that they had always followed proper procedures. But the public wasn't buying it. Every interview, every press release only made things worse, especially when reporters started digging into Karen Wills's past dealings. Karen, once untouchable, was now scrambling. She knew the lawsuit was bad, but the fraud allegations? That was worse. If the county got involved, if an official audit confirmed what Lisa suspected, Karen wouldn't just lose her position, she could face criminal charges. So she did what she had always done when backed into a corner. She tried to manipulate the system in her favor. Behind closed doors, Karen lobbied county officials, pressuring them to retroactively approve the annexation. If she could convince the right people that the HOA had simply made an administrative error, she could weaken Andrew's case, maybe even get the lawsuit thrown out. She made phone calls, set up private meetings, and cashed in favors she had built over the years. But what she didn't realize was that Lisa had already anticipated this move. Late one evening, Lisa received a tip from an inside source, one of the very same county clerks Karen had tried to pressure. "She's trying to rewrite history," the clerk warned. "She wants the county to backdate approvals, make it look like everything was legal all along." Lisa smiled. Karen was desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. The next morning, Lisa filed an emergency injunction with the county court, blocking any retroactive annexation approvals and forcing county officials to remain neutral until the lawsuit was resolved. With the legal trap set, all Andrew had to do was wait. Karen had spent years using bureaucracy to crush people who couldn't fight back. Now, she was the one running out of options. And this time, she wasn't getting away with it. Andrew sat in the courthouse, his hands clenched into fists as he watched the jury file in. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The moment Karen Wills and her corrupt HO would finally be held accountable for everything they had done. The courtroom was packed, not just with reporters and community members, but with people who had followed the story from the beginning. Some were there out of curiosity, others because they had been victims of HOA abuse themselves. Lisa sat beside him, calm and composed, her legal pad open and pen in hand. Across the aisle, Karen Wills sat with her own attorneys, her usual confidence gone, replaced by thinly veiled tension. She had come in dressed sharply, as if still trying to present herself as the untouchable authority figure, but it wasn't working. The weight of public scrutiny and mounting evidence had already worn her down. The judge entered, called the trial to order, and the opening arguments began. The HOA's lawyers tried to paint Andrew as a stubborn landowner who refused to comply with community standards, but Lisa shut that down immediately. She laid out the real story, backing every claim with documents, photos, and legal filings that proved the HOA had knowingly and willfully trespassed and destroyed private property under the false pretense of annexation. Then came the key moment, introducing the whistleblower. Mark, the former HOA treasurer, took the stand. He looked nervous but determined as he placed his hand on the Bible and swore to tell the truth. Lisa walked up to him, her voice steady and firm. "Mr. Peterson, can you explain to the court what led you to resign from the HOA board?" Mark exhaled slowly. "I resigned because I couldn't be part of what they were doing anymore." Karen and the board knew they didn't have the legal right to annex Mr. Wilson's land, but they did it anyway. The plan was to make it seem like a bureaucratic mix-up if they ever got caught. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Lisa nodded. "And how do you know this?" "Because I was in the meetings where it was discussed," Mark said. "I saw the emails." Karen told the board that Andrew wouldn't have the resources to fight it, and that by the time he realized what had happened, it would be too late. Lisa turned toward the jury, letting that statement hang in the air. "So you're saying this wasn't an accident? That the HOA deliberately falsified their annexation claim?" Mark nodded. "Yes. They never filed it with the county because they knew it wouldn't hold up legally. They just told the construction crews it was approved and moved forward like it was a done deal." Karen shifted in her seat, her jaw tight. She looked at her attorneys, but they had nothing. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury could see it. But the real turning point came when Lisa called Karen herself to the stand. Karen tried to act composed, but there was a faint tremor in her voice as she answered the judge's questions. Lisa stepped forward, her legal pad in hand. "Ms. Wills, when did you notify Mr. Wilson of the annexation of his property?" Karen lifted her chin. "Notices were mailed out last year." Lisa tilted her head slightly, flipping through a stack of documents. "That's interesting, because the county has no record of any annexation, and Mr. Wilson never received any notice. Can you provide proof of these notices?" Karen's expression flickered. Our office handles those details. I don't personally keep track of every letter sent." Lisa didn't blink. "So you have no proof that any notice was ever sent?" Karen shifted. "The records should exist somewhere." Lisa stepped closer, holding up a printed email. "Ms. Wills, are you familiar with this email?" Karen's eyes darted to the page. The color drained from her face. Lisa turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is an internal email from Karen Wills to the HOA board, instructing them to move forward with demolition before Mr. Wilson can get a lawyer involved." She turned back to Karen. "Do you deny sending this email?" Karen opened her mouth, closed it, then glanced at her attorneys in panic. Lisa pressed harder. "Ms. Wills, do you deny that you knowingly violated Mr. Wilson's property rights and ordered the destruction of his barn under false pretenses?" Karen hesitated. The entire courtroom held its breath. Then, finally, she exhaled sharply, her shoulders slumping. "I was acting in the best interests of the community," she muttered. Lisa didn't let up. "That's not what I asked. Did you knowingly violate the law?" Karen's silence was deafening. The judge leaned forward. "Answer the question, Ms. Wills." Karen swallowed hard, her fingers gripping the witness stand. "I didn't think it would come to this," she whispered. Lisa turned to the jury, then back to the judge. "No further questions, Your Honor." It was over. The courtroom was silent as the judge shuffled through the final documents, his expression unreadable. Andrew sat stiffly in his chair, his heart pounding so hard it echoed in his ears. Lisa remained calm beside him, hands folded neatly on the table, but even she couldn't mask the tension in the room. Across from them, Karen Wills sat motionless, her usual arrogance replaced with something else. Fear. The evidence had crushed her defense. The emails, the whistleblower's testimony, the fraudulent annexation records, it had all unraveled before her eyes, and now, she was about to face the consequences. The judge cleared his throat and finally spoke. After reviewing the evidence and testimony, the court finds that the Homeowner Association of Brookstone Hills acted unlawfully in its attempted annexation of Mr. Wilson's property. His eyes swept across the room, pausing momentarily on Karen and the remaining board members. This was not a simple mistake or miscommunication. This was a deliberate act of fraud, executed with full knowledge that it violated both county and state property laws. Andrew exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his chest loosen just a fraction. "The court rules in favor of the plaintiff, Mr. Wilson," the judge continued. "The HOA is ordered to pay full restitution for damages, including the destruction of private property, loss of livelihood, and legal expenses. The total amount in damages awarded to Mr. Wilson is $1.3 million. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Even Andrew, who had prepared for this moment, felt his breath hitch at the number. Karen visibly flinched, her fingers digging into the table as her lawyers whispered frantically in her ear. But the judge wasn't done. He turned his attention directly to Karen. "Furthermore, based on the evidence presented in this case, I am referring the matter to the State Attorney General's Office for criminal investigation." There is sufficient cause to suspect that Ms. Wills and other HOA board members engaged in fraud, destruction of private property, and misuse of HOA funds. Karen's face turned ghostly white. Lisa barely concealed her satisfaction. The lawsuit had always been about justice for Andrew, but uncovering potential criminal charges, that was a victory no one had expected. The judge shifted his gaze to the remaining HOA board members. As for the Homeowner Association of Brookstone Hills, this court orders an immediate forensic audit of its financial activities over the past 5 years. Until the audit is completed, the HOA will be placed under legal supervision, and a temporary administrator will be assigned to oversee its operations. Furthermore, any enforcement of HOA rules, fines, or property claims will be suspended until this process is complete. Andrew could barely believe what he was hearing. The HOA, ***, the same corrupt entity that had bulldozed his land without a second thought, ***, was now effectively crippled. Every unjust fine, every abuse of power, every fraudulent claim was now under scrutiny. Karen sat frozen, her once powerful presence reduced to nothing. The whispers from her attorneys had stopped. They knew there was nothing left to say. The judge's final words sealed the moment. Let this case serve as a reminder that no organization is above the law. Court is adjourned. The gavel slammed down, and the room erupted into chaos. Andrew felt a wave of relief, exhaustion, and triumph wash over him all at once. He turned to Lisa, who was already shaking his hand. "You did it," she said, her voice firm but with the faintest hint of a smile. "No," Andrew said, glancing at the people in the courtroom, his neighbors, Bill Harrison, the strangers who had supported him through this fight. We did, ***. As he stood and looked toward the gallery, he saw a crowd of supporters waiting for him outside the courtroom doors. They had fought alongside him, and now they had won. Andrew stood at the edge of his property, staring at the ruins of what once was his barn. The lawsuit was over, justice had been served, and the corrupt HOA had been dismantled, but the scars of what they had done still remained. His land, which had been his sanctuary for over 15 years, had been violated. The barn he built with his own hands was nothing more than a pile of splintered wood and rusted nails, and his fields, once full of life, were now a patchwork of dirt and destruction. But Andrew wasn't the kind of man to dwell on loss. He was the kind of man who rebuilt. The first sign that he wasn't alone in this fight anymore came the morning after the verdict. A pickup truck rumbled up his driveway, and when Andrew stepped outside, he saw Bill Harrison in the driver's seat. The old man stepped out, tipped his hat, and gestured toward the truck bed loaded with wooden beams. "Figured you could use some help putting that barn back up," he said with a grin. Andrew barely had time to respond before another truck pulled in, and then another. Soon, there were dozens of people on his land, neighbors, friends, even complete strangers who had followed his story. They had come with lumber, tools, paint, and determination. That day, Andrew's land was alive again. The sound of hammers striking nails, saws cutting through wood, and laughter filled the air. The same land that had once been crushed under the weight of a bulldozer was now filled with people determined to put it back together. The new barn rose quickly, stronger than before. Someone donated fresh soil and seeds, and within weeks, the fields began to sprout new crops. His farm wasn't just being rebuilt, it was being reborn. But the impact of his fight didn't stop at his property line. His case had sparked something far bigger than he had imagined. In the weeks following the trial, state lawmakers began pushing for HOA reform laws. His story had made its way into state legislatures, forcing officials to take a hard look at how HOAs operated. New bills were introduced to increase transparency, limit the power of HOA boards, and ensure property owners had real legal protections against forced annexations. Andrew hadn't set out to change the system, but he had. What started as one man refusing to be bullied had turned into something that would protect thousands of homeowners from ever facing the same nightmare. Months later, as he walked through his farm, his new barn standing tall, his fields full of life again, he realized something important. His land had once been a symbol of destruction, a reminder of how quickly everything he built could be taken away. But now? Now, it was a symbol of resistance. He had fought back, and won. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over his fields, Andrew took a deep breath. The fight was over, but the message remained clear. no one would ever take his home from him again.